Hi everyone. Hello. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, Masid, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Let's start. First of all, let's thank you all for joining us and being punctual. Good afternoon. I am Ahmed Mazinia. I'm the marketing and sales executive here at Moldian ISO Consultancy. So, as you all know, MICC is you all can hear me, right?
We can hear you, Masid.
We are a global consultancy and sustainable business assurance partner working with Sri Lanka's leading firm, Halcyon Private Limited. We specialize in food safety, information security, safety, and sustainability. So today's session focuses on HACCP Level 3 Food and Safety Theory. So our session will be led by Rasita Nirosha, who will lead the full presentation and share in-depth insights. So I'll hand over to Rasita. Sir.
Right. Thank you, Mazid. Thank you very much. Even despite your busy schedule, you all join for the program. Thank you very much for your time. So let me try to give some value addition for your time as since you joined for this program. I mean, we'll be working with Maldives market on the consultancy work almost now maybe around 10 years. So we have a little bit of understanding about the food safety requirement as well as other requirement. So mainly if you consider the Maldives market, why people very concerned about the hazard and then why we need to improve the ensure the food safety requirement because when you look at the picture the map Maldives map, you can see there are a lot of islands one particular island is belongs to a one resort, and then there will be a lot of challenges especially logistic and the storage, and then of course there can be a lot of challenges from the climate change because there are some there are days you have continuous rain, and then there will be a rough sea, so you can't bring your doonies, you can't bring your materials, or maybe you need to keep stock, the additional stock storage. So this all this the challenges been in Maldives will actually give much more greater challenges in the food safety requirement. So what we need to do is we need to make sure we are meeting all the food safety requirement, as well as adhering to guideline, and then of course especially if you are running a resort, if you are in the resort business, you have to make sure we are covering all the basic requirement. So and then the advantage the Maldivian the resorts, you are mainly dealing with the international guests, right? So they are very much know about the basic requirement, right? So what are the food safety requirement, and then they are very particular about those requirements. We are Asian, we are not very concerned about gluten and all those kind of requirements. This as one example. But especially when you're dealing with the Europeans, so they are very particular about gluten. So they even look for gluten-free bread. So we need to make sure, meeting their that amount of level of food safety requirement. So the guests they are coming from international market, and then the needs food safety requirements are totally different. So we need to adhere to that. And then when you go for hazard analysis critical control point, so this basic requirement, it's in line with the Codex Alimentarius. Basically, all HACCP, don't worry about this technical part. So it's basically look for the Codex Alimentarius, and then Food and Drug Authority, FDA, and then maybe EU requirements. So we covered all these things, and then then foodborne illnesses. That if there's an issue, if there's a breakage, right? If there's a breakage, then that will become a kind of a bad image for the resort. So there are so many challenges, but for me, the main challenge would be the logistic part and the storage, and then the diversity of the customers you are dealing with. So when we develop the HACCP program, HACCP program for resort or like, a go down, we need to consider all these factors, right? So when you do a HACCP, like a little bit of the theory part here, like, HACCP is very much focusing on prevention, right? A very important word called prevention of like, foodborne hazards. So there are a few words. One is called hazard, other one is called food, like, prevention. So it means like, before something happen, they try to control it. See, I think like everybody familiar with the quality control system. Quality control mean like, you finish your product, whatever the product, and then there's a QA team, QA department. They check the product, and then they like, they say, okay, product is good to release the market, or product is bad, you need to redo, rework, reject. But in resort, we can't do that. Why? The product when is coming from a kitchen, straight away you go to the give it to the customer, right? So customer will be the test piece. Say for example, if I'm in a manufacturing site margarine, so I'll manufacture margarine and then keep it for 4 days. Why I keep it for 4 days? Because for to get the microbiological results, you need 4 days. So only when I get the microbiological results, then only I release the product into market. That's how it happened. But in your industry, the resort, you can't do that. Why? You need to straight away you send the product. So that's why you need to have a preventive mechanism, right? You need to have a very good preventive mechanism. So HACCP is a preventive mechanism. So you set some criteria. You say, okay, if I do like, cook product up to this temperature, this will basically kill all the microbes, right? So this basically kill the microbes. So then, okay, I'm make sure like I'll cook product up to this temperature. Or if I keep a product into refrigerator on like, for this temperature, below this temperature, there won't be any microbe growth, right? So that's what we try to do, right? So this is a kind of like interesting. So Mazin, I think my slides are moving, right? Now is the second as a fundamental. You can see the slides are moving, right? Team, you can see this, right? Slides moving. Can I get feedback? Maybe you can use a reaction. You can see my slides are moving, right? Is it? All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Kavita. So then when you set a like, a HACCP program, there will be objectives. So there are like, when you say hazard, we call there are 4 types of hazard. Maybe we call chemical, physical, micro, allergenic, right? There are 4 types of hazard. So in any food industry, you have all these 4 hazard. You have either chemical hazard, chemical contamination, physical, nail, like, like, cloth, whatever, hair pieces. So that can become a physical hazard. And then microbiological, salmonella, coliform, like those kind of thing. And then maybe allergen, right? So there can be 4 type of hazard. So the hazard proactive mechanism, what it try to do is like, proactively try to eliminate or maybe reduce where there won't be any issues for the consumer. Try to reduce that kind of hazard. So there are 4 hazard: biological, chemical, physical, allergen, right? And then out of these hazard, you try to develop kind of a control point. So what are the benefits? It complies with your FSSC food safety certification requirement, complies with the Codex, EU, and then when you have this system, it will be basically like, comply with the Maldivian Health FDA requirement, right? And then of course, it will increase the confidence of the guests and the client. And then maybe when you're dealing with the tour operators, they will ask whether your organization is certified. So you can show them like, look, we are certified. Whatever the food or beverage you are providing to your customers, it will be safe. And then entire staff knows about the hazard requirement, right? And then of course, reduce waste and rejection. Yeah, that's very important because food, there's a huge cost, right? So when you following the hazard principle, your rework rejection will be minimizing. So that then again you have a another additional benefit. Now, before you go for HACCP, there's a requirement called prerequisite program. We call it PRP, right? So these are kind of a fundamental. See, what we do is like, most people, if somebody said, okay, let's go for a HACCP program, you straight away start to work on the HACCP, which you can't do. Right, what you need to do is like basically you need to cover the basic GMP requirement. We call it good manufacturing practice requirement, right? So these are basic GMP requirement. So like, first one is like, personal hygiene. So people need to have a clean uniform. Why? Otherwise, if you have a smelling uniform, what will happen? What do you mean by smelling? Smelling mean you always have some microbes growing already, right? Why microbes are like, why there's a bad smell? Because when we inhale and exhale, we exhale carbon dioxide. There's no odor at all, right? But what happened? The microbes, they actually exhale, like some material with the sulfur. So that's why you get a bad odor, right? So uniform has to be clean, gloves has to be like there's no chemical. Then there should be a proper hand washing facility, and then if somebody has a cut or illness, they should report it. So this is very basic requirement. So if you don't have this requirement, don't go for hazard, right? And then cleaning and sanitation. So there should be a cleaning schedule, cleaning verification, your chemical, other material, separate storage, those things has to be there. So this is also part of the GMP. So they call prerequisite. So this is even before HACCP. So if you don't have a proper cleaning schedule, or if you don't have a proper clean place, don't go for HACCP, right? So cleaning has to be there. And then pest control. You can't have cockroach, you can't have mice. So there should be a pest control agreement, right? There should be a pest controller. And then there should be like, a monitoring of pests. So under HACCP, under FSSC standard right now, they are not checking the monitoring, the pest pattern. But when you go for advanced standard like FSSC 22000 or BRC standard, right, those standards require you to develop the pest monitoring patterns, right? You need to identify the pest monitoring pattern, right? So this is a kind of a mandatory requirement. And then storage and transport condition. Your vehicle, your go down, your storage facility, your temperature control, like, especially where you keep the vulnerable product. What do you mean by vulnerable product? Meat, milk, the eggs, right? Sometimes you can see like, due to transportation issues or due to like, cold chain issues, you can end it up with the eggs with the fungus, right? You can see. Now, can I ask this question from the audience? Say, uh, I believe like most of you are working in the resort. So you get a load of eggs, right, in the box, inside the box, and then like, it's covered with fungus. What are you going to do? Any feedback? What are you going to do with that? See, you are the stores, you are in charge of the stores, you receive a egg with the shell, right? But you can see outside there's a fungus. What are you going to do? Any idea? What are you going to do with that? Any idea? So I mean, you might have this kind of a situation, right? So you are receiving a set of egg boxes, and then when you open the box, I mean, egg has a shell. When you open the box, you can see fungus. What are you going to do? What are you going to do with that? So that's the issue, right? You might argue like, okay, shell is there, so we can use the egg. You can assume nothing happened to the egg. Or maybe somebody will say, okay, we'll wipe it, we'll wash the eggs and we'll take it. So there can be different thing because it's relied with the cost. But what's problem with the fungus is like, egg, they have so small porous. So maybe you don't know amount of the porous goes into the eggs, right? So what the issue with the fungus is, they release chemical called aflatoxin. So maybe there could be part of chemicals goes into the eggs. So you can't use it. Right. So these are the challenges. So you might need somebody who knows about all the technical stuff, right? So this is one area, storage, transportation condition, maybe cross contamination, and then first in, first out, shelf life, So all are kind of a main requirement. And then maintenance of equipment promises like, smooth surface drain. You can't have open drains, like, all equipments what you're using cannot have damage, right? And then those are very important part. And then of course, the water quality and ice. You have ice machine, but like, how do you pick the ice from the machine? Where do you keep the scoop? Right. So those are kind of an interesting question, right? When you go for hazard. So under GMP, we need to cover everything, right? Under GMP, we basically need to cover all these requirements, right? So, and I try to put up like a small note where basically like, resource specific, water desalination system must be monitored. So you have a system, right? You basically like, extract water, right? So that water desalination system is part of your GMP requirement. So we need to have a proper control over it. And then of course, waste management, right? And then island setting, where your island setting. So those requirements we need to study. So these are kind of a pre-requirement. So before you go for HACCP, you need to make sure these requirements are covered, right? Now, there are 7 principles, right? So when you go for HACCP, there are actually seven principles. So these 7 principles mean, like you can see, first one is hazard analysis, identify critical control point, establish critical limit, monitoring procedure, corrective action, verification, documentation, and record keeping. So these are like, very interesting. So when you go for hazard, your manual or your system should give example, should give evidence you are covered all these requirements. So hazard analysis has to be there. So out of the hazard analysis, don't worry about this because I'm going to do a case study. I'm going to give a kind of, don't worry, I'm not going to give a case studies to you, right? So I will be basically like, give a example of how do you do the hazard. So maybe if you are already hazard certified, then of course recheck whether you're following the correct mechanism, right? Or if you are willing to go for a hazard, then this will be a kind of a perfect opportunity. You can restart in a proper methodical way, right? So I'll just cover the theory part, but then I'll come to the example, right? So this hazard identification, critical control point, establishing. So you say like hazard identification mean identify the potential hazard at each step. So there's a one critical process called process mapping, right? So I'll come to that with the example. So when you map the process, like, receiving, you have a boat, we call Dhoni, you unload the product, you kept it in like, unloading bay, and then you use a cart, right, or buggy to transfer it. So we need to study each and every. Then again, you unload in the store's floor, right? And then somebody will take it, count it, do the QC, and then they stored in the shelf. So otherwise you might say, okay, transfer product from a buggy. No, that's wrong, right? So there will be each and every step. So when you do a process map, we have to make sure we covered all the minor steps, right? So there can be like, my example, salmonella and roix, the glass from bottles. So you bring so many bottles. I can be like, a lot of carbonated drinks or other. So there can be like collusion. So small glass pieces, particles can be there if there's a breakage, which you can't identify. So we need to have a mechanism for that, right? Then identify critical control points. So this means determine the points where control can prevent, eliminate hazards. Say, for example, like, okay, temperature. Freezer, what is the temperature you're going to maintain? So we will keep that particular temperature there. So these are like kind of a critical requirement, or maybe cooking temperature or cooking time, right? So these are kind of a interesting areas. So you identify, okay, to kill microbes, I need to make sure the temperature should goes up to this particular level, right? And then establishing critical limits. So you identify like, okay, my critical limit is like, cooking chicken exceeding 75, keep for 5 minutes. That's my target. Or maybe some other product, right? Or maybe if you are keeping in a kind of like, hot area, you say, okay, 65, I need to maintain 65. So those identify limits and then monitoring procedure. So pointless if you have an identify system, if you don't monitor. So ensure remaining under control, right? Maybe automated system or maybe thermometer you identify, right? And then corrective action. So if there's a failure, right? So what are you going to do, right? So like, you identify like, if are you in a position to reheat it or not, right? And then verification. So this is very important. What do you mean by verification? Mean whether your thermometer is correct, you do the calibration part, and then you make sure, like, chicken, when you cook, it goes up to above 75, right? It will stay there for 75, and you expect like that chicken product after 75 5 minutes, there's no microbes. So you need to send sample for the lab, and then you validate, okay, my system is okay, right? Then determine record keeping. So you might need to keep several records. So these are, like, basic principles, right? So now when you go for implementation, right? When you go for implementation, right? When you go for implementation, you have, like, preliminary steps. Assembling HACCP team. I will basically explain this. Describe the product and develop a process flow diagram. So this is very critical, right? And then steps to identify the possible biological, chemical, micro, allergenic hazard and assess their risks. So second step, you identify the product, process flow diagram, each and every step, what are the hazard, and then hazard analysis part. And then you identify the critical control point. So this is the summary of HACCP system. But one thing I need to advise, like, before you go for a hazard, you need to do a thorough GMP audit, prerequisite audit. And then when you do a thorough GMP audit, you can identify what are the gaps you are having right now. So what are the basic gaps? So then of course you can identify, all right, okay, my main problems gaps are like this. So I need to verify these gaps. I need to correct it. Say, for example, when you go for a kitchen, you don't have a hand washing facility, right? So what you do is, like, you introduce a hand washing facility. Otherwise, when you go for a hazard without introducing hand washing facility, always there will be, like, people will come and touch the product with the contamination. So there's no proper control, right? So then you need to have so much of, like, document control system. But when you implement proper GMP and say, okay, look, people will wash their hands and then they will come with the clean hands. When they go for a washroom or whatever, again, they will come through the same process. Where there's an example, right? So I'll explain that part. Right. Now, so when you do a hazard, there's a thing called critical limit. Establish specific parameters such as temperature, pH, or time to ensure safety. So you identify, like, like chicken above 75 for 5 minutes. Milk pasteurization temperature, this amount of time. So when you set this information, you started to monitor, implement procedure to regularly check and record critical points. So you do this part, like, there will be a record keeping part, and then corrective action. So if there's a deviation, what are you going to do? Right? If there's a critical limit deviation, and then verification, regularly reviewed and validate the hazard system to ensure the effectiveness. Say, for example, now you might say, okay, one classic example, even verification is required for GMP as well. Why? So you introduce a tap, right? Sentence tap is there, the detergent is there, and then you expect people, like, people will come and wash their hands, and they go into they come to the kitchen with their washing their hands. Yeah, you expect that. But what happened with the time sometimes? People will, like, forget about that habit. They straight away come to the kitchen without their washing their hands. Now we have a question. How are we going to verify that? You do training and everything, and then people still come into the kitchen, because in malls, like, you have people, you have a workforce, you have a staff coming from different countries. So the different countries, they have a different cultures, right? Different hygiene practices. But when they started to work in a resort, doesn't matter which country, which cultural practice, which hygiene practice they have to adhere to all the hygiene guidelines, which is set by the organization, which is set by this HSB requirement, right? So now, how are we going to verify whether people are washing their hands, right? So we did one interesting study. We did one resort on Male. So after we complete the project, and then we did a spot audit. What do you mean by spot audit? Like, without communicating to the team, we conduct the audit, right? So we did a spot audit, and then while we are doing the spot audit, we take sub samples. What do you mean by sub samples? Mean we take, like, samples, like, using kind of a sterilized material. We take hands of samples, like, you take samples, put it in the microbiological, and then, like, let it grow. So people who has not washed their hands, the microbiological load is very much, right? So there should be a kind of this kind of a mechanism, right? Like, spot audit without communicating to the team, you started to do that, right? So this is one particular area, right? So this is interesting study. And then like, this verification is very important. So depend on your organization, depend on the maturity of the people, maturity of the team, you can design the verification plan, right? And then of course, risk factors of the product. Now, I told you, I will basically give you a kind of example how to set the hazard, right? So the whole purpose here is like you need to know about the hazard, how do you set the hazard plan, those kind of requirement, right? So first thing, you need to identify the team, right? Food safety team. So don't worry about it's a full-time team, but maybe like say for example now in the resort or in the go down, like if you are coming from a different background, just let me know. But like this particular program pretty much focus on the resort and the go down in Male. So if you're working in a resort, if you're working in a go down, right, you might have a like a engineering person from the resort. Go down, you don't have engineering person, right? And then you have a chef. He knows about all food safety requirement. And then you have a GM, maybe you have a F&B, you have like housekeeping. So all can be part of your food safety team. But maybe chef might have some idea about the microbiological part, right? So, but what about the chemical part? So when you go for a HACCP system, so standard asks like, we need to have a microbiologist, we need to have a chemist. So those kind of people has to be there. So imagine like, resort, you're going for the HACCP, and then maybe go down, you're going for a HACCP. If you want to hire a chemist and a microbiologist, what will happen? Your cost will go up like nothing. And then maybe after you complete the HACCP study, uh, you might they might not have anything to do, microbiologists and chemists, because resort you don't have lab, right? So they will basically contribute at the hazard program. So there are areas like, there are these specialized areas. Maybe you can use like, a chair, the microbiologist or chemist on a contract basis, only for this particular study. But there are organizations, say for example, now if you have a fish factory, and then if you're running a like a microbiological lab, so you can use the microbiologist into a HSB system. So mainly like when you identify a team, there should be a person knows about the operation part. There should be a person knows about the engineering part. There should be a person knows about the product. There should be a person knows about the customer requirement, right? And then the seasonal pattern and all. And then of course then microbiologists and the chemists has to be there, because when you study the hazard, we study chemical, physical, microbiology, and the allergenic area. So food specialists maybe can help you on those requirements. So maybe like, sometimes what we do is like, when we work on the project, the resort, they might not have the microbiologists and a chemist, but in our team, we have people with the qualified people. So we include them into a microbiologist and a chemist on a contract basis. So that also accepted by the certification body, because like, you are getting knowledge, and then when we sign the contract, they will say, okay, whenever there's a requirement or whenever there's an issue, right? These people will help them. And at the beginning, they will help them to set the system. So this is one thing. So you need to have a proper team. Now you have homework. So if you're already certified, go back and check whether your HSB team is there. Sometimes what happens is like when you go for audit, you have HSB team, but already those people are no more in the organization, are already left, right? So whenever person left, there should be updation. So because you need to replace that, this is very important thing. So this is not going to be like, dead document, dead system. So this will be a live system. So your team, like, your fire team, sustainability team. So you need to have a food safety team, right? So food safety team should be like, comprised with like, covering all the department, HODs or second layer. And then you need to include these competencies like microbiological and the chemical, right? So this is food safety team, right? And then second thing, this is one thing is missing in most of the cases, right? Reference document, right? So I don't know, when you go back and check whether your HACCP system, whether you have, because like, you need to have a set of reference, like, guideline, maybe Maldivian FDA guideline, hygiene requirement, your customer requirement, right? GMP requirement, HACCP, codex, right? So all the, and then there will be like legal requirements. See, in Maldives, there will be legal requirement. They say like every week you need to do this testing, monthly you need to do this testing, annually this testing has to be there. So those are FDA legal requirement. So those things you need to have those study. Like, this is very important. Like, when you work in the other country, you need to have this understanding, right? What are the main documents you are looking? And then there can be some customer requirement. Say, especially European, they might say, okay, look, I need this kind of a requirement. So that could be like initial document. So you need to mention what are the terms of reference, what are the documents you are going to cover. So if somebody else want to do a HACCP study again, maybe a refresher, and then they know like, okay, these are the documents they refer, and then this will act as a kind of like, your base document, right? So this is one thing. So now still, I mean, imagine you have not even touched the HACCP study, right? But these are like, prerequisites. You need to have a solid team, and then you need to have a reference. And then this is very important, product intended use, right? So this is challenging. See, if I'm into margarine manufacturing, or if I'm into like, yogurt, or if I'm into like, some nut product, or if I'm into some like, coconut water product manufacturing, uh, my scope is very limited. Why? I need to only focus on one product, even bottled water. So my product is very simple. So what do you mean by intended use? See, this product can be used for drinking if it is water. Margarine, you say, okay, it can be used as a spread or it can be used as a cooking. So there are two type of intended use, right? So depend on the product, right? So it said like, labeling related to product safety and or instruction for handling, preparation and using. So there will be like, different countries, they have a label requirement, right? In Maldives, there are certain label requirements. So the price, expiry date, those requirement has to be there. And then we need to know when you go for an intended use, we need to know about possible consumer abuses, right? Say, for example, if it is a margarine, like, they can, like, they're supposed to cook, they like, but they are without cooking, they use as a kind of a spread. So what are you going to do with that? So, like, so those kind of a requirement, what are the possible, like, not the foreseeable consumer abuses, right? Not the foreseeable, but reasonable abuses, right? The product. And then expected end users, like, what do you mean by expected end users? Mean like, vulnerable group. Say there are some product they use vulnerable, like, I mentioned about the gluten. So there will be like, particular people, set of people, they will ask gluten-free bread, right? Gluten-free beer. So they will ask that, right? So end users, because they are very vulnerable. Or maybe like, infant, if you have a children, or maybe elderly, because like, when you run a resort, you will get this entire range, right? You are getting an entire range. So you need to be very, very, very focused on that. So expected end users and then expected end user handling and preparation. So what are the expected end user handling and preparation, right? And then like, storage and labeling. Say, for example, now at the reception, receiving point of the guest, they will ask, do you have any allergies? So then there should be a proper communication mechanism to the kitchen. So room number 71, whatever the number, so they are allergic for this, and then they have a special food requirement. So those communication has to be there. So entire team should know about all these things. So intended use is very important, like, the product. But say, for example, like, where we come from very strong manufacturing background, right? So when you come from a manufacturing background, like, you are only worried about one particular product. It can be a cordial, it can be a jam, it can be a water, carbonated drink, whatever, right? So you have only one intended use. But when you work in the resort, it will be like, a nightmare, because you are basically covering lot, right? So this is the challenging part, intended use. So you need to study this. But most of the HACCP studies I see are not cover this area in detail. This is a flow diagram. This is very important. You can see the red line. Food safety team should physically verify the process flow diagram. So this is very important. So when you draw a process flow diagram, say for example, butchery, You receive the meat, you store in the freezer, you take it out, and then you put it into a thawing, and then you take it out, you cut, and like all these steps. So if you say like, you take the meat, cut and cook, that's wrong. Because there will be so many like, transferring point, so many cross contact points. When you develop the process flow diagram, you need to add all, right? If there's a product like this process flow diagram, it's not simple. It's very complicated. So food safety team, entire team should go and verify this. So you need to sign off, right? This process flow diagram. So this is one particular example. Just go back and see when we do the training program, right? So normally, like, when you do a training program, now this is a kind of online, this is a Mazin and team actually organize as a kind of a like promotional program. But when we do actual training, right? When you do actual training, we actually like, do a case study, not theoretical part, because HACCP you can't learn like, while you are sitting and looking at the screen, right? So what we do is like, if your organization already certified, we will ask people to bring the process flow diagram and we go to the flow and ask them to physically verify. This is remember, like, I don't know why people are not following this, but this is actually a mandatory requirement. Now, this is actually a mandatory requirement, right? So this is like, but most of the people, they don't follow that. In manufacturing also, there'll be so many gaps because like engineering team, they do actually a lot of modifications. So we missed out all some of the modification, right? So this is very important factor, right? So the physically verified. So when I'm discussing about the training program, so we take the process flow diagram and go to the flow and physically verify. Sometimes like, like juice making. So people say, okay, juice making. So the process flow diagram is about manually squeezing and making the juice, right? So all your hazard, everything is based on the manual preparation of juice. But when you go inside the kitchen, you have a juice making machine, right? Then the type of hazard will be totally different, right? So if it is manual, you cut it, you use a knife, and then like, there will be a different mechanism. But the machine is a totally different thing. You put entire orange and then the juice will come out. The hazard inside the hazard totally different. So this is very interesting, right? So physically you need to verify. So imagine, go down, if you have a dry product, maybe one process flow diagram, one HSV plan. If you have a dry and a frozen product, there will be two separate one, right? So even in your go down, if you have like, value addition, sometimes like say, for example, you bring cashews and then like, you have like, repacking it. Of course, you have to include that as a separate hazard. Or maybe like, you bring some bulk material and then you repack it, right? So those are kind of a critical requirement, right? But imagine in the kitchen, the resort kitchen, right? So when you go for a resort kitchen, what will happen? Do you have like, hot area, cold area, right? The bakery items, so many. And then on top of that, you have a staff kitchen, right? So different areas, right? So we need to do a study, hazard studies, different process flow diagram, and then different hazard studies we need to do, right? So this is very, very interesting because like, see, this is why I spent a little bit of time on this process flow diagram is if you miss out on one particular process, right, that carried a lot of hazard. And then like, if you miss it, there's no other way you can recapture it, right? That's the challenging part. There's no other way you can recapture it, right? So then this is like, ingredient hazard analysis. So you need to identify like, maybe material number, right? The material description. This can be like, different format, right? Like, this can be like, different format, but like, you need to identify supply. Say, for example, you might say, okay, I'm getting sugar. So supply location, you might say sugar supply X coming from this particular area, country. Supply Y coming from different country, is it? So then depend on the country, there can be different risk, right? So you identify what are the hazard, then hazard description, then you identify severity and likelihood, right? And then material risk rating. So you identify, right? So then you like, like, how do you going to manage your supplier, like, or maybe a justification. So this is one format, but you need to you don't need to stick to this format actually, but you can use a different format. That's no problem. But of course there can be a risk assessment for your material. So this is one important area, right? So this is one area you need to cover. Right. Now, this is the process asset. I believe this area, everybody has this, right? So you identify the steps. So what do you mean by process step? So if you miss a single step, right, then you are not going to capture the hazard. Say, for example, receiving of, say, eggs, right? So under receiving of eggs, you identify chemical, physical, microallergenic risk assessment, right? So then you do a risk assessment, and then this will be a kind of very bulky document, right? You identify the severity, likelihood, and then you identify the risk factors, and then you identify what are the preventive. So previously, I don't think now we are using this. Previously, we use decision tree, right? So now we are going by probability and severity. But previously, the codex alimentris, that mechanism, we use the decision tree, right? There are so many questions, and then you identify like the CCP or not CCP. But now with the FSSC and ISO 22000, even BRC, we are not following the decision tree mechanism, but we are basically going based on the risk factors. But I just mentioned here mainly because just for learning purpose, because sometimes people might ask question. I had a previous session, somebody asked, where's the decision tree? So I told him currently under ISO 22000 or FSSC or even BRC, we are not using this the decision tree. But if you are going on a HACCP, basic HACCP based on the codex alimentris, you might reconsider the decision tree again. So nothing wrong with that, but we are using the risk mechanism right now. So this is one format you can use it, and then you ended up with so you can see it's the kind of funnel concept, right? You identify the process step. Under each and every process, you identify the risk, chemical, physical, microallergenic risk. And then you do a risk rating. And then with the risk rating, you identify what are my significant risks. We call it critical control point, and medium risk, operational prerequisite, and low risk, PRPs. So, and then you started to focus only on the critical control point, right? So when you started to focus on the critical control point, of course, when you controlling it and validating it, you have to make sure you are not providing any product where it can harmful for your consumer. So this is the kind of a proactive mechanism they're actually looking for, right? So this is one way of looking at the area. Right. Now, there are some small areas I prefer to discuss, right? So HACCP result. So these are areas of HACCP, the theory part. Up to now, do you have any question? I believe you're okay, right? If you have any question, so that is how basically we do HACCP system. So when you go for a HACCP, the resort example, say there are a kitchen area, buffet handling area, cold room, ice machine, and then of course live cooking, right? Say now say for example, people might have I'm like the challenging part in Maldives, right? See, you might say, okay, you have to have a controlled environment, kitchen is fully covered, and then maybe cold kitchen is AC, those requirements are there. But then all of a sudden, you have a pool bar, right? And then pool bar, you have action kitchen. And then even at the action kitchen, you have a food items. So if there's a food contamination, you can't say it's not coming from action kitchen, right? So it's open environment. Then you need to have additional control. So what are you going to do with the remaining food product, right? How do you make sure the product are kind of a safe? So these are the kind of a challenges we are having in resort. So when you do HSCP study in the resort in Maldives, we need to consider. And then same time, you can bring people into a dining area and then you can have a buffet. Of course, you can have all the controls. But what about when you transfer food into their chalets, when you transfer food into their water villas, and then when they eat there. So what could be the mechanism, like intended use? Say, for example, you might say, okay, people need to keep food in hot condition for 3 to 4 hours. But what happens if guests keep it for like maybe 6 and 7 hours without keeping in hot condition and start to consume? And if there's a contamination, so that's why under intended use, you need to consider the possible abuse, right? I mean, it can be possible, right? Like, if I'm in the water villa and you might serve the food, hot food with the hot cabinet and everything. So the first question, do you have hot cabinet in your resort? That's one first question, right? So when you go for hazard under GMB, we need to have hot cabinet. So you serve and then, but I just keep food outside, then start consuming. And if there's a food poisoning, what will happen to me? So, like, can resort people say, okay, look, we provide food with the hot cabinet, and then, like, the guests kept it outside. So that's why this problem. Can you do that? I don't know, right? That's the challenging part. So when you design a HACCP, so that's why like this HACCP, if you're doing this HACCP in a realistic way, right, it's a challenging because not like city hotel. City hotel, you have a buffet, people will come and the room service just next door. But in resort, like you it's a far away kitchen to a water villa. The corner water villa is like far away, right? And then maybe your high-end guest will stay in a far away water villa because he need a privacy, and then he needs special attention. So those are the challenges we are facing in Maldives, right? So this is the challenging part, right? And then CCP, cooking, chilling, cold chain, and then again reheating. So and then maybe a buffet display, like so and then like and other thing is like when you work in the factory environment, you can give all the guideline book training program for the people. But for guests, you can't do that, right? They are for leisure. So if you started to give a lecture for the guests, that will be a challenge for them, right? So you can't give that. So there are so many limitations in the resort, right? So but with the limitation, you need to do your job, right? So key risk can be a cross-contamination, temperature abuse, and then poor hygiene. Maybe not from poor hygiene from the operational end, maybe poor hygiene from the guests, right? Imagine you keep the product like in the buffet, so guests started to touch the product. He may be having a contaminated hand, right? So I'm like that's possible, right? So there are people from the resort, so guests started to touch it. You can't just check guest's hand. You can't, right? I don't know. So you can't check guest hands. So they started to touch the product. That can be a source of contamination. So what are you going to do with that? So these things should be answered when you design the hazard plan. And that's why you need operational people. So this cannot be like, answered by a microbiologist or chemist. So the operational people, maybe a F&B manager, he knows like, the behavior of the guest, right? He knows that. So he will say, okay, look, this particular guest, there can be a cross contamination because they might touch all the food. Maybe you can politely refuse it and then maybe replace it, right? So when you do a HACCP study, right, we need to consider these factors, right? So this is not easy, right? And then maybe distribution, we call go down, right? Receiving. So receiving of product, because like you're getting a lot of product from maybe air cargo, sea cargo, and then there will be like transport from the boat, and then maybe local transportation. So transport checks, everything has to be there. So now right now, like when you started to work in HACCP in Maldives, maybe 10, 15 years back, the resort doesn't have a, like their own dhonies, so they use the public dhonies. So the temperature control is a challenging, really challenge. But right now, most of the resorts they have their own dhonies with the freezers inside, so that's perfect, right? And then maybe ambient, chill, frozen segregation product. Maybe like Maldives, like we have the issue with the space. So maybe there can be a cross contamination due to that, right? And then dispatch, time, temperature control. Like, say for example, now we are like, our transport very much depend on the weather pattern, the rough sea and all, right? So after you load the product into a dhoni, and if there's a rough sea or if there's alert, then you can't transport. So then those will be like kind of issues. So these are the areas. And then we need to have a daily monitoring tools. And then of course, there are now technology we can use so that we can use a GPS tracking, right? Sometimes people tend to turn off the machine, the cooling machine, just to save the fuel. But if you have a GPS tracking and the temperature ups and down, that will be easy, right? So the auto logging system. So when you call, there are equipment called SAPAC, and all the equipment you keep it in the product, and then when you take it back, you can put it into computer. You check whether the temperature, there's issue with the temperature. So these kind of a thing you can keep it. So kitchen areas, resort. So these are like few examples I try to explain to you. Right. I told you I'll give some another practical example. This is about the kitchen. It doesn't have to be like this, but this you can see like in the first part, entrance and exit. So you have a single entrance, you have a single exit, right? So that's it. And then they use a separate exit and entrance. If possible, do that. Or otherwise, you have a separate timing, and then maybe you have a separate garbage dispatch time, those areas. You can do that, right? So these are you can have a different timing, right? So you have a you can have a dishwash situation station. So you can see this first part, dishwashing station, service areas. So these are kind of unhygiene areas, or maybe semi-hygiene area. So dishwashing station, you keep it far away. Why? All soil, the contaminated products are there. And then next to it, so maybe you might have a solid wall. So inventory storage are there. And then you have a food preparation, and then meal cooking areas, right? So this food preparation can be semi-hygiene. So you if it is a vegetable, you cut the vegetable, peel off, and then you transfer into the meat cooking. So you can see the cooking area is a kind of like corner high-end area. So I'm when you see the kitchen, you have a coal kitchen, butchery is a separate area. It's not connected, and both are under temperature control. And then the bakery products, and then the action area. So those are separate areas. But sometimes you might have a challenge when you go for action kitchen, like outside kitchen. So everything is together, right? So then again, you need to have a proper control. So better to have a segregation. And then when you set up a kitchen, right, try to eliminate all the woods. Sometimes we see even butcheries, we see a lot of wood doors. So when you see a wood door, what will happen is there can be a fungal growth, right? So these are the kind of problem we see in the kitchen, right? So these are one particular one area you can see these issues, right? So this is one area. Then other challenges, right? When you go for a hazard program, so there can be some challenges, right? So I'll try to discuss these challenges during the program as well, initial stage as well. So one is your depend on the structure of your resort, right? Or depend on the structure of your go down. There can be so many challenges, but and then your transportation, cold storage, and then maybe guest behavior, those are challenges. But these are kind of a common thing. Training, educate staff on the HSB principles and their role in the system. So when you do a training program, don't just stick to a theoretical training. Right now, this particular program, we are just 2 hours, maybe one hour plus something, just to explain the basic requirement, right? But when you do a workshop, when you do a training for the staff, just do a practical session. Right. Say, for example, I took one example. When you do a hazard program with the staff, just take them into the kitchen, take the process map, go through the process flow, right? So then they will remember. And then, of course, there will be ROI, return of investment, right? When you do a training program, what is the ROI? Then automatically your HSCP plan will be reviewed. So people who have trained already reviewed. So that's one thing. So when you do a training, just make sure it's practical. Right. And then same time, try to communicate the importance. People might say, okay, why should I have to wash the hands? So maybe just before the training program. So these techniques we are using just before the training program, you randomly take some hands-offs, just at least 4 days before. Randomly take hands-offs, right? And then present without putting the names, like present those names, people on the screen with the pictures, right? So this is one thing, and then documentation. So establish through a record keeping to demonstrate compliance and effectiveness. So maybe you can set a good record keeping system. So like everybody, even including us, we are not very familiar to write. We don't want to write, right? So always try to go for a auto data collection, maybe temperature, auto logging system, right? Or maybe always have a backup system. If I'm the one who write down the information, so after sometimes I'm quite used to it and I try to continue give you the same numbers, right? So maybe have a spot audit, right? If it is a manual, if it's automated, then it's fine. And then continuous improve. Always challenge your system. Do an internal audit, train your team, ask them to do a cross contamination audit, and then maybe take hands ops, take tabletop ops, take product samples, and then if there's a contamination, come back, and then of course maybe you can identify what is happening in the other resorts, other regions, and then what are the new food trends. So those things you can communicate with the people. So make it live, right? So otherwise people might think HACCP is just only for the audit, right? And then these are the kind of benefit, right? So when you have food safety, HSP help prevent foodborne illness and protect public health. So it's public mean your guests, and then not only guests, your staff. So you are providing food for your staff, and then if they get ill, you can't provide the services, right? So you have to make sure your staff cafeteria is safe, like the guest cafeteria. So that's why, when people go for HACCP, when people go for HACCP system, staff cafeteria has to include there. And then, of course, legal requirement, which is we meet legal requirement and demonstrate commitment to food safety. So FDA requirements, everything can be covered because you have water testing, food testing, everything can be included into your HCP plan. And then quality can be improved, and then reduce waste, and then your customers, your resort management team, and then of course your guest, they will be really confident about your product and the food items, because if they have a food safety issues, they might not come back and they might not recommend, right? So food safety mean a prevent system and ensuring food safety, safe food, right? So preventive system, I believe I explained that very clearly at the beginning. It's a preventive mechanism, and then prerequisite forms from foundation of HSP. So first, before you decide, you say, okay, I need to go for HACCP certificate, but before you go for HACCP, just do a GMP, PRP audit. And if your PRP is there, then only go for it. And then this is a teamwork, right? So food safety team, everybody, including your security people, right? So this is very important. People who run the Dhoni, storage, everybody has to do their own part. So this is a kind of a teamwork, right? Every staff members play a role in maintaining food safety. Every staff, even your housekeeping, your pest control team, everybody, right? So if they see a rat, housekeeping, and if they ignore it, that can be a disaster, right? So that need to communicate. So we need to have a proper mechanism. So it's a kind of a teamwork activity, right? Now, I think within this given short time, I just try to give a kind of a flavor of the system. So if you have any question, you can ask now. Masin, I think they don't have any question right now. Maybe you can wind up, and then people who are willing to come for the program, they missed out this sometimes. Maybe we can share the recording. Maybe Shahan might have the recording. So Mazin, I think we covered the task what we plan to discuss. Right, team. I think so thank you very much for your participation. And so if you have any question, I think our contact details are there. You can connect with me or you can connect with Mazin. and then we'll wind up the program. Thank you. Emma Jane.